felt like I was waking from a dream I couldn't remember. I didn't understand what was happening at first. I was in a white, sterile room, and there were shadowy figures all around me, slowly morphing from shadows into human shapes. My first thought was that this was another dream, a nightmare, except I didn't feel like I was asleep anymore. My brain was foggy, but through my haze, I realized that the people standing around me wore surgical scrubs and masks. I attempted to lift my head, but nothing happened. I opened my mouth to speak, but there was something in my throat and around my face. I began to panic. My body wanted to thrash wildly, but not a muscle moved. What had happened? Had I been kidnapped and forced to be a subject in some strange experiment? The figures around me were speaking, and I tried to make myself focus, but the terror was growing. The room was full of antiseptic smells and beeping machines. Then the shadowy figure closest to me said, "Scalpel, please." That's when I realized what was happening. I'd been brought in for surgery that morning to correct a congenital heart defect that was causing overcirculation in my body. I'd been terrified about the surgery for months, but it was a medical necessity. One of the last things my mother had said to me before the doctors took me back was, "Sarah, don't worry, you won't feel a thing." But I could feel everything. The cool air in the room, the pressure of the breathing tube in my mouth, the surgeon's hands as she swabbed an area of my chest. Even my eyes weren't under my control. Sometimes it felt like they were blinking rapidly. Sometimes they felt dry and scratchy, like I wasn't blinking at all. I kept trying to move any part of my body. Fingers, toes, nothing worked. The procedure had been explained to me ahead of time. They would give me a paralytic as part of the general anesthesia, so my body wouldn't be able to move reflexively on the operating table, but I'd be unconscious and wouldn't feel anything. But somehow, I had woken up. The paralytic had worked, but the anesthesia hadn't. I watched the surgeon come closer to me with a scalpel. I tried to open my mouth, but it was like every muscle in my body was made of lead. "Stop!" I tried with all my might to tell her. "Stop! I'm awake!" But there was nothing I could do but lie there, completely helpless. I felt a slight pressure on my chest, no pain at first. The blade of the scalpel was so thin, it barely felt like anything. And then I could feel a sharp pain in my chest. I was sure I was dying. I had never felt pain that excruciating in my life. The sides of my chest hurt, and every scream I wanted to let out was silent. Then the surgeon used the other surgical tools. Each one felt different, but they all hurt. The smell of the room was terrible. Actually, I felt more pressure and pain as they began to explore my internal organs. Well, it was less painful once they were touching inside my body, but the pressure, the sensation of my individual organs being moved was terrible. I was sure I was going to throw up. That's when some survival instinct kicked in. "You can't throw up," I told myself. "If you throw up, you'll choke and you'll die." I concentrated on staying calm. I tried to think about my friends, about school, about anything except what was happening to my body. But the sensation of the surgeon's hands as she touched my heart made it impossible to stay calm. It was like something out of a horror movie. I wanted to scream at them to stop. I wanted to scream for my mother. I wanted to scream and never stop screaming. And then I realized that part of the pressure that I felt in my chest wasn't just the surgeon's hands. It was the breathing tube, which was only giving me one breath every couple of minutes. It felt like there was a giant dog sitting on my open chest. I couldn't get air into my lungs, and I was afraid that even if I could breathe the way I wanted to, breathing would make the excruciating pain even worse. I had to make my body move. I had to find a way around the paralytic to let the doctors know that I was awake and feeling everything. I concentrated as hard as I could, but each time I felt close to moving, the surgeon's hands would shift inside me and a new wave of panic and pain would hit me. Finally, I managed to twitch my hand. At least I thought I did. At that point, I couldn't tell if I was just imagining it or not. Then I felt a hand on mine, and I almost passed out with relief. It was the assistant, and if she'd seen my hand move, then maybe she'd realize what was happening. The breathing tube gave me another breath. I drank that air gratefully, hoping my ordeal was about to be over. Then I realized that the assistant was holding my hand in place, not reassuring or helping me. I heard her say to the surgeon, "This one's a little jumpy." and they both laughed. I had never felt such overwhelming despair and terror in my whole life. I was going to die here, and I was going to die in terrible pain. I didn't realize it was about to get worse. One of my eyelids was forced down and taped in place. Half of my world went black, then the other half. Now I couldn't see the surgeons. Couldn't tell when they were about to touch me or cut me. The machines around me started beeping and I felt a terrible chill, like someone had dumped ice into my open chest. My body began to shiver, but I didn't know if the muscles were really working or if I was just imagining it. My lungs were slowly being crushed by lack of air, and I couldn't feel anything but fear. I silently said my last goodbyes to my friends and family. Then, something strange happened. It was like I left my body and floated up to the ceiling. My eyes were open again, and I could see myself down there on the table. Could see my open chest and the mess of organs inside me. The tape over my eyelids, that horrible breathing tube down my throat. I could see the surgeon and her assistant still joking with each other. Had I died? Was I on my way to the afterlife? I didn't feel scared anymore, and luckily I couldn't feel pain. But what hit me now was a flood of memories, like when people say your life flashes before your eyes as you're about to die. The first face I saw was my mom's. I remembered those awful few months leading up to the surgery. I had been so scared that the surgery wouldn't work, that I would die on the table or afterward from a heart complication. My anxiety had me terrible to be around. I was mean to everyone. I never did what was expected of me at school or at home, and nobody even tried to make me because they knew I was sick. My mom was the only person who pushed me, who made me do my homework and study for college admissions tests and do my chores, as though she truly believed I was going to have a long, full life. But there was no guarantee, and because of that fear, I took all of my anger out on her. By the time the day of the surgery rolled around, we were barely speaking to each other. But in the waiting room, when I'd been shaking with terror, she had looked at me and told me everything would be all right, that I wouldn't feel a thing, that she would see me on the other side. I'd wanted to tell her that I loved her, but I was too afraid and angry, irrationally angry, as though she was the one who was making me do this. The nurse had taken me back to the operating room before I could get the words out. Remembering that now, I knew that I had to live. I had to live so that I could tell her I loved her and that I was sorry. I looked down at my body lying on that table and I concentrated with all my might. Move your hand, I told myself. You have to move your hand. It wasn't working. I saw the body on the table as though from a great distance. I could sort of remember what it felt like to struggle to breathe, to feel the scalpel ripping into my body, but all of that was slowly fading. It would be so easy to just keep floating. Then my hand twitched. Once, twice, 3 times. The machine started beeping again. Suddenly, I slammed back into my body on the table. The pain was back, the struggle to breathe, but I didn't care anymore. All that mattered was living through this. An assistant was removing my breathing tube. The beeping of the machines was a cacophony that hurt my head. I could hear people saying, "She's awake and we have to get her back under." They had figured it out. Someone was talking to me, saying my name, telling me to try to stay calm, that I would sleep in a moment. I was still terrified. What if the anesthesia didn't work again? Or what if I did go back to sleep, but I never woke up? Blackness edged my vision again, but this time I let it take me. When I woke up again, everything was fuzzy. It took me a moment to realize where I was, and when I did, I panicked, thrashing on the bed, afraid that I was still being cut into. A nurse came and calmed me down, and then a surgeon came in. I was awake, I told her. I felt everything. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said how sorry she was that this happened to me. She said it was very, very rare and that I was one of the unlucky ones. I didn't know what else to say. In some ways, I did feel like one of the unlucky ones, but at the same time, I was incredibly lucky to have survived. Tears welled in my eyes, then started sliding down my cheeks. I felt so confused and afraid until a face appeared in the doorway, the one face that I desperately wanted to see. My mom. She hurried to my bedside and asked me what had happened. I just held onto her and told her that I loved her and was sorry for all the times that I'd hurt her. She said it was okay, that none of that mattered, that she loved me so much. Then I took a deep breath and started to tell her what I experienced. The recovery from the surgery was long, but I'm doing okay now. I still have PTSD from my ordeal. Some nights I wake up in a panic, thinking I can't move, that I'm back on the operating table with a scalpel about to slice me open. Sometimes my body won't move, or my voice won't work, even though I'm not under the influence of a paralytic. It's like the memories are so strong, they can freeze up my body again. But my mom has been wonderful through it all, helping me through it. I realize now how grateful I should have been for her all along. After all, it was her strength that gave me the strength to survive.
Hi everybody, I'm Steve. Recently, some terrible stuff happened in my life, and I can't even believe it was true. In short, I woke up right on the operating table. I went to the hospital a few weeks ago. I was really sick, right in class, so I had to call an ambulance. The paramedics came and took me away. Of course, I could have asked them what was happening, and where we were going, and if my parents would see me, but I was in such terrible pain that I didn't care about all that stuff. Take me wherever you want, just help me out. When I finally got to the hospital, the examining doctor told me I had to be prepared for surgery. It turned out the problem was appendicitis. Basically, it was a standard situation, nothing special, but it was necessary to remove the appendix as soon as possible. I've heard that this kind of surgery is as easy as pie for experienced doctors. They can even do it with one hand. It's a typical surgery, part of their daily routine, so there's nothing to worry about. If I only knew what would happen next. In an hour or two, my parents came to the hospital. They had a talk with the doctor while I was being prepared for surgery. The doctors ran some tests and examined me. Nothing special. Honestly, I was a little bit anxious. It was my first ever surgery. Even though they tell you don't be afraid, it's creepy to imagine someone cutting into you and doing something inside, like a real-life horror film. Anyway, my doctors were really good ones. They talked to me and joked around, and I finally calmed down. In the operating room, the anesthesiologist came up to me and told me some jokes too, to make the atmosphere more friendly. Then he put a mask over my face. I felt my body become heavy. Everything around me was floating, and I fell asleep. So everything as it should be. Anyway, I was lying there dreaming, under anesthesia while the doctors were performing the surgery. And it was going well. But suddenly, in the middle of that calm and peace, some unexpected things happened. The way I remember it, I slowly started to wake up, a little bit at a time. And I felt like I had slept poorly. Headache, heavy body, my thoughts all mixed up. And because of that, I didn't understand where I was or what was going on. While my mind was trying to wake up, I was also trying to open my eyes. It wasn't very easy. When I started to open my eyes, I got hit by a bright white light. When I got used to it, I finally opened my eyes fully. I was still trying to understand what I was doing there. Honestly, it would have been better for me to stay asleep as long as I could, because when I realized what was going on, I started to panic. I was lying on the operating table, and they were doing the surgery, right in front of me. I wasn't just shocked, I was horrified. But there was another problem. I couldn't get their attention. My body was heavy, and I couldn't move it. I couldn't feel some parts of my body. I couldn't shout. I couldn't move my leg or hand, even lift my head up. All I could do was lie in silence, watching while the doctors did something inside my body. I couldn't show anybody I was awake, and the doctors didn't notice it for some time. For about 15 minutes, they continued the surgery, talking to each other. I saw them giving each other scalpels and forceps, with their hands going in and out of my stomach. In that moment, I felt helpless. Just imagine watching surgery on your body, and you have no way to make people pay any attention to you. It's just so unreal and creepy. But I was lucky in one way, if I can call it lucky. I couldn't feel anything in my stomach. Like, no pain, nothing at all. It made me happy, considering my situation, because I could see the operation, okay, but I couldn't feel it. I don't suppose I could have stood that. So I was lying on the table, watching the surgeons cutting something. And when the panic subsided, I decided it was quite interesting. Not every person gets such an opportunity, you know. And there was no pain. So I started to get over the creepiness of the situation and got used to it. But suddenly, one of the doctors looked at me and froze, with his mouth open and a scalpel in his hands. When he noticed I was staring at him and blinking and that the anesthesia wasn't working, he was totally stunned. Suddenly he started shouting. It seemed to me I even moved because of his shouting. People started running around the operating room. The machines got noisy, and doctors were rushing around the table with worried faces and talking really loudly. And I was still lying watching the scene play out. The main question in my mind was, is the whole surgery done, or do I have to wait for some more? The anesthesiologist who put me to sleep an hour ago came back again. He took my mask off and did something to the machines. When I tried to tell him that nothing hurt and they don't have to worry about me, he put the mask back on. I felt weak again and fell asleep in a minute. And that could have been the end of the story, but no, because in a few minutes I woke up again. I don't know what's wrong with my metabolism, but that day it was against any sleeping at all. But this time I was luckier. The doctors noticed I wasn't sleeping again, and it was after everything was over. The surgeon saw my eyes were open and shouted again. Yeah, that day I really played on his nerves. This time there was no more messing around. They put aside all the tools and took me to a recovery room. They seemed to be fed up with my anesthesia tricks. The whole thing made sense to me by evening. Little by little, my senses and feeling came back to me, and I got back to normal. But all the doctors were coming to see me for a few days. They checked on me, asked me a few things. Maybe they were sorry, maybe just curious. Because nobody understood what made me wake up twice when I was under a good dose of anesthesia. Has anybody had experience with anesthesia? How did you feel? Write about it in the comments below. And don't forget to share and like this video. Maybe one of your doctors will find it and tell me what went wrong. See you, folks, and take care of your health.
Hey everyone, I'm Vince, and I've got a horrible story to tell you. I wouldn't wish it even on an enemy. Because what I've been through should never have happened to anyone. It's better not to even imagine, so before watching the video, switch off your imagination. Anyway, I was always not in great terms with medicine. For some reason, if I go to the hospital with a simple cold, they have to rescue me from lungs edema the next day. That's why I don't really go there without a special need, except maybe seeing a dentist. But life is an interesting thing. The more we fear something, the more likely it will happen to us. Sooner or later, your fate will find you. Although it was not long ago when I've become such a fatalist. Before, I've been popping painkillers, hoping the pain would just go away. But when I got nauseous and started vomiting, my roommate said I'd better go to the hospital, but I remembered about my previous experience and just popped another pill. Long story short, soon I was carried into the ambulance because of the sharp pain in my stomach, which just didn't let me just walk. Then everything was like in a fog. I was brought into the hospital. They made all the tests and dragged me into the operating room in the same wheel cover, not thinking much. Somewhere in the middle of the road, they undressed me, shaved me in some interesting places, and covered me with a light blue sheet. And they hit me with some injection, shot in my left butt cheek. After that, all the pain was gone, and I felt the affection to people instead. Then I kinda blacked out in 1, 2, 3, and I still have nightmares about what happened next. These nightmares repeat 10 times in my dreams and at the court hearings. They better be only on trials, because in my 18 years, half of my head has already gone gray. I came to myself from a terrible, just inhuman pain. I wanted to scream, to die, to kill everyone around me, or to have a meteorite falling from above. Just anything to stop it. There was a white ceiling above me and some kind of a lamp. I wanted to move, but I realized my body wasn't listening to me at all. I could just open my eyes a little to see the ceiling. That's it. Honestly, I was not willing to watch some beautiful views. Literally, I had a feeling I was cut into pieces, shredded, and twisted in a meat grinder. I felt someone else's hands in my stomach. You see, someone else was digging in my stomach, and there was nothing I could do about it. My head immediately started showing me some pictures of slaughterhouses, scenes from the Saw movie, and some other bloody stuff. But the worst thing was, I was helpless. I blacked out several times, and I woke up from the doctors saying things like, "This patient, me, was too nervous." They have already restarted my heart twice, Can you believe that during the appendix removal surgery, their patient's heart stopped twice? But they continued cutting me, and they didn't even try to find out what the matter was. At the same time, through all this hellish pain, I heard them discussing their personal problems, something about the kids, someone's farm, shopping, and I was really dying. In the end, my mind decided it was enough for today and just switched off. Not like the previous times, this time seriously. I even said goodbye to my parents in my head because I thought that was it. I woke up in a week, all wrapped in wires. Coma. For the first whole week, I couldn't come back to my senses, and I was lying in such a cute vegetable state, breathing through the tubes. My doctor, the one that couldn't decide during my operation whether he should send his daughter to study ballet or just the local dancing club, said that my appendicitis gave some aggravation and it turned into purulent peritonitis. All that beauty exploded inside me, and my guts were flooded with some unpleasant liquids, so they had to do far more complicated surgery. I told them I was well aware of how they gargled my intestines. I heard it with my own ears, and added that with their qualification, it is really surprising that I somehow managed to wake up because I was lying on the operating table, aware of everything that was going on around me. The anesthesia didn't switch off my mind, just the body. All 4 hours of surgery, I was completely awake. I felt and heard everything that was going on around. And you know what the doc told me? That it's impossible. Probably my brain just deceived me. People can trip a little during anesthesia. And I myself advised him not to stand in front of his daughter's dreams. If she wants to do the ballet, let her do it. And I also asked to tell the nurse that nobody is making preserves today. People buy ready-made stuff in the supermarket. The doctor looked at me in a kind of strange way and never came back to my ward again. So now I'm actively suing the hospital to compensate for the horror I've been through, at least a little. The most interesting thing is that the independent expertise has shown 2 cardiac arrests and a pain shock coma, while the medical card doesn't show anything except cured peritonitis. And all the doctors say the same thing, that the anesthesia was done in a proper way, and I'm making all this up to get the insurance money. I would love to make it all up because my psychology treatment is not covered by the insurance. And now I'm extremely afraid of sleeping, seeing all those nightmares about not being able to wake up during another surgery, waking up to realize that it's still a dream and another mad surgeon is not standing over me with a knife. So yeah, I'll go crazy without a...
I opened my eyes, and in front of me, there was complete darkness. I was lying on a hard surface. The place was cramped and stuffy. "Mom, are you here?" I said quietly and realized that I was in a confined space. I started screaming and kicking the walls. It seemed that I was stuck somewhere, possibly as a result of the collapse of our house. Suddenly, I heard someone screaming and shouting. The voices of people were heard closer to me. "I'm here! Help!" I was shouting with all my strength because there was not enough air to breathe. After half a minute, I saw the light. The slab was removed above me. Behind it, I saw the shocked faces of my relatives. They looked as if they saw a living dead person. "Hi, my name is Dylan. Some time ago, I was almost buried alive. What's more, this was done not by my enemies and not by criminals, but by my dearest and nearest people, my parents. At the beginning of winter, my immunity was weakened and I started to constantly get sick. For almost 2 months, I've had a sore throat and sinusitis, one after another, several times. I really hope that you do not know what these are. Doctors prescribed me a lot of medicines and vitamins, but I did not feel any effect at all. I was so exhausted that I began to constantly sleep and almost stopped eating. Not surprisingly, my condition soon worsened. For some time, I stayed in the hospital, and then the doctors made a helpless gesture and said that they did everything they could and my parents were supposed to take me home. When they asked what they should do, the doctors answered them, "Just wait," although they did not mention what to wait for. A couple of days after the discharge, my temperature rose sharply. I called my parents, said that I felt sick, and that was it. I remembered that I was shaking, as well as had seizures and even some hallucinations. When my mom arrived, I no longer showed any signs of life. At first, she thought that I was sleeping, So she carefully took a thermometer to measure my temperature and came up to me. She saw that I had blue lips and I was not breathing. The thermometer showed a body temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. I was very cold and my mother thought that I was dead. She called an ambulance, but the doctors just made a helpless gesture saying that there was no pulse and I was not breathing. At that point, medicine was not effective anymore. Soon, Dad and other relatives arrived together with forensic experts who issued a death certificate. Mourning began in my family. It's so hard to imagine what my parents lived through. When I woke up, my mother rushed to hug me. Some people continued to stand rooted to the spot, and others ran to the door while crying wildly. I did not understand what was happening to them all until I started to get up. What the heck? There was the mourning atmosphere all around, together with some wreaths and flowers, and I was lying in the coffin. Damn it, in the coffin. It was a real nightmare. Then I started screaming, "Have I died? Can anyone explain what is going on here? Why is my photo in a funeral frame?" Soon, ambulance paramedics showed up at the door. They looked no less shocked than the others. They took my pulse, listened to my heartbeat, and said, "He is alive." Oh, really? That's the news? Could anyone finally explain to me what the hell I was doing in the coffin? Well, and stop shying away from me as if I were crazy or infected with some virus. You know, a very strange and unpleasant feeling occurs when you wake up like this, in such an atmosphere. At some point, I even thought that I was dead, and now I see my funeral through someone else's eyes. Then my mother told me that after the forensic experts pronounced me dead, my parents began to prepare for the funeral, and in fact, I woke up when the farewell ceremony had already passed. A few moments later, I was supposed to be buried in the ground, from which I would have hardly got out. And if forensic experts had insisted on carrying out an autopsy, then I would have simply been killed by pathologists. Oh, I need to drive away these thoughts from myself because they make my hair stand on end. How lucky I was, if you can call it that. So, does this really mean that I could have died if I had woken up an hour later? And in this case, would I have been doomed to a long and painful death in a coffin, or would I have been killed by doctors? That's horrible. Even thinking about it makes me feel scared. A logical question came up. What was it then? Am I really raised from the dead? That's actually what the old ladies from my neighborhood began saying when they saw me. Are they right? Everyone was asking if I saw or heard anything after I passed out. If there was anything that many people are talking about. Well, first of all, I was alive, so I could not say for sure if there was anything there or not. Secondly, I just didn't see anything like this or simply forgot it, so I could not answer such questions. I was sent to some clinic so that I could undergo examination there. At the hospital, some doctor was supposed to explain what had happened to me before. He said that what was going on with me was called lethargic sleep. In such situations, protective functions are activated in a human body, and in order not to work to the point of exhaustion, the organism starts to work at idle. The pulse is only 2 to 3 beats per minute. In fact, breathing takes place at the same rate. Well, usually people with such characteristics are mistakenly taken as dead, as had happened in my case. This phenomenon is quite rare, and frequent cases of having a sore throat can lead to this condition. Now the reason for this nightmare is clear, but can I fall into a lethargic dream again? And what will happen then? Is there a risk of being buried alive? There were more questions than answers, and my fears resulted in panic attacks. I became afraid of sleeping. As soon as I began to fall asleep, I jumped out of bed in horror and pinched myself. I guess every time I subconsciously felt that I was dying. Moreover, even when I managed to fall asleep, I saw dreams in which I was again lying in a coffin and was being buried in the ground. It was a real nightmare. This could not last any longer, and my parents made me visit a psychotherapist. He was completely powerless in eliminating my fears and could not convince me that everything was okay. That was all because no man on earth could guarantee that this would not happen again and I would never be buried alive. I realized that soon I would lose my mind because all the thoughts were occupied only with this. But then I found a solution to my problem. I decided to be so busy all the time that there would be no time left to think about death. I enrolled in the gym and joined the equestrian club. In the morning, I exhausted myself with 2-hour trainings and then went to school. After classes, I went to the equestrian club, and in the evening, I only had the energy to get to my bed and crash on it. Although sometimes I had no energy left at all, so I fell on the floor right at the door of my apartment. I instantly fell asleep and did not even see any dreams. I took pleasure in this enjoyable fatigue because I did not have time to think about what I had gone through. But as soon as I let myself relax, when I didn't want to go to the gym or just stayed at home all day, terrible thoughts and memories came to my mind again. So I needed to be firm towards myself and strictly follow the schedule since this was the only possible option in my case. However, I soon realized that I was just trying to get away from the problem and stress that I had experienced while aggravating the situation. Then the idea popped into my head. For a long time, I could not make up my mind to start this conversation, but then I overcame myself. I told my parents that if I die or fall into a lethargic dream, I want my phone to be buried with me. It must be fully charged in advance. Parents were not very pleased to talk about this topic, but still, they gave me a promise that they would fulfill my request if trouble happened again. After that, I felt much easier and calmer. You know, I've never thought that at the age of 15, I would have to give instructions to my parents on how to bury me and what to do in case I die. That was just unthinkable. I felt as if I was a 100-year-old man. However, now I look at life from a completely different perspective. While my peers are full of youthful maximalism and are sure that their life is just beginning, I know that we are all mortal, and every day can be the last one. I learned this from my own experience. Now I was more eager to live. I'm afraid of wasting time, so I live to the fullest. I want to do as much as I can. I want to reach great heights and make numerous achievements. I want to have time to leave a trail in this life after myself. I still have a very busy schedule. Now, in addition to the gym and equestrian sports, I also took up drawing classes as I had wanted this for so long. I don't even know why it was I who fell into a lethargic dream, why I experienced it, but now I'm even glad that this happened. I have learned how to value and love my life. Yes, the path to awakening was hard, but I coped with everything. Do you have any fears? Tell in the comments what you are afraid of and how you cope with it. Do not forget to click on the thumbs up button and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss the new videos and be on the same wavelength with us.
Hi, my name is Claire. I'm 16. I'm just a normal teenager. Or I was, until recently. Have you ever dreamed of superpowers like those of comic book superheroes? Imagine that you have it, and because of this, life has become noticeably more difficult. Watch to the end, and you will learn how I learned to have X-ray vision. Recently, my mom and dad and I moved to a new house, and I had to go to a new school. I was very afraid that I would not be able to find friends quickly. I always thought I was a little strange and different from my peers. I often noticed that I had strange dreams, and that I could feel if a person next to me was sad or unwell. My strange sensitivity, as I called it, was always treated poorly by my classmates. This was because I once asked my classmate Jack to be careful on his bike on the way to school because I had a bad dream. I didn't know why I asked him so confidently, because it was just a dream. But on the way, his bike chain caught in his pants just like in my dream and he fell to the side of the road. Jack came up to me with a bandaged leg and gave me the honorific crazy. That's how it got to me. So I was afraid that history would repeat itself and decided to keep my mouth shut. But surprisingly, everyone in the class seemed to be happy with me and sometimes paid too much attention to me. I quickly became friends with the guys, and I even started to like school, which I had not noticed before. Do you quickly get used to new people? I finally started to understand biology, and I loved it so much that I wanted to go to medical school next year. It seemed that my life had changed a lot, and for the better. So I thought, until my crazy echo of the past caught up with me in the new place. In the morning, as usual, going to school, I realized that my eyes hurt a lot. I remembered the words of my beloved grandmother and blamed it on the computer in my life. My father didn't take me to school that morning because he had a bad stomach ache and didn't know what to do with it for 4 days. My mother nervously put me in my father's car and drove me to school. I saw how she was going through it, and I wanted to calm her down. I still don't know how I saw it, but when I looked at my dad, I saw that there was something wrong with his pancreas. It was highlighted brown on his stomach. I told my mother that. She pretended that I didn't say anything strange and just said, I guess I should check it out. I could see that she wasn't taking my words seriously, but Dad was in so much pain that he was ready to believe anything to make him feel better. And he was checked. Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic inflammation. He was urgently sent for surgery, and the doctor added that it was discovered just in time. At the hospital, my dad thanked me and said that I had the talent of a doctor. And I didn't know what to call it. I just saw what was inside him. Then I started to see what was inside the others. My classmate, Judy, had hernia in her back. The math teacher had heart failure. At first, it was fun to watch other people's organs, how they moved, how they didn't look like each other. But then it started to make me afraid. Because I could see, but I couldn't tell. And the person was suffering. There was a feeling of impotence. But how? And most importantly, what do I say? Excuse me, I have x-ray vision and you should get your heart checked out because you have a blocked valve on the right ventricle of the heart. I would have laughed in the face of the person who told me this at best and at worst, handed them over to a mental hospital. After living like this for another 3 months, I realized that it was unbearable. I told my mother that I could see the organs of all the people around me. My mother always knew what to do, and I thought that here, too, she would find the perfect solution. And the next week, we went to a science center. At first, I thought we were just going to the doctor, until the door slammed and we were on opposite sides of that door with my parents. Great. At that moment, I felt that my parents had brazenly betrayed me. Where did they send me? What for? I was filled with resentment and fear. I did not understand what was coming. Experiments began on me. I was placed in solitary confinement as a criminal. There was a bed, toilet, TV, pillows, and food. Well, yes, I agree, not the most terrible cell of a prisoner. But it did not save me from the thought, when will all this end? Each morning began with tests, injections, and conversations with a man who called himself a doctor but confused medical terms. I hope he was just nervous. Then conversations with a psychologist about my childhood and parents. I didn't want to talk about them at all. Have you ever been very offended by your parents? Then you will understand for sure. The last straw of these incompetent experiments for me was the literal cruelty of the orderly. When I refused to take a pill, the employee hit me on the shoulder. I took the pill and realized that I had to run away from here. This was not easy because I was only allowed out on the street once a day at about noon and with a guard. I'm still sure that I was helped by some kind of miracle. Well, or hormones, because the guard was in love with the nurse and missed the moment of my escape. And now I was waving at him from the back of the gate. The problem with the terrible conclusion was solved, but I did not think where I would go after this prison. The only options I had were my parents, my grandmother, or an independent life. My parents might put me in that prison again, or I might become a tramp in a white shirt, which was not a pleasant prospect either. So it seemed that going to my grandmother was the only sensible and pleasant option. My grandmother welcomed me with joy. I told her everything I'd been through. She was angry and promised to scold my mother for doing this to me. Grandma is funny when she's angry, and I was glad that I found support in her. Everything seemed to start going as usual. I went back to school. I didn't miss much during the week. This week passed for me as a painful year, and everyone else in school had only 3 math lessons. And even these terrible pictures of sick people around me disappeared. I even wondered if I was imagining it. Then it was even more insulting that I was in this cage of torture for nothing. But I couldn't believe that these organs everywhere had stopped tormenting me. Just like I couldn't believe my grandmother had turned me in. She told my parents where I was. And here were my precious parents standing on the doorstep with a guilty face and thinking that I would forgive them just for showing up on the doorstep of a house where they were not expected? I looked at my grandmother with the question, "Why are you doing this to me?" She was the first to speak. She said that I got it wrong and my parents didn't know what I was going through. My mother continued and apologetically told how it really was. They took me to the examination and diagnosis of the brain to understand the cause of this phenomenon. They had no intention of dumping me on the test. Doctors, under the pretext of suspicion of brain disorders, urged my parents to leave me for free treatment. My parents got scared and of course they said yes. And only when they came home they began to suspect that something was wrong. Doctors did not give them the pictures of my head, refused to let them see me, and even took away my phone. My mother got scared and started coming to the hospital every day. The nurse, in confidence, said that I was missing. My mother almost turned gray in the emergency room. She began to swear and called for the chief doctor, but there was no answer. My grandmother made the responsible decision to tell her that I was fine. I suppose I would have done the same, though I thought it was unfair and cruel of her at the time. It was like my heart was released. I realized that no one had betrayed me, and my parents didn't get rid of me as a monster that could tarnish their reputation. They love me and really want to help. My mother was determined and went to court to deal with the offenders. I don't know exactly what happened with the pseudoscience center. My mother was happy, so she had won the court. From her, I learned what really happened to me. The whole story with X-ray vision turned out to be my wild imagination and passion for medicine, plus overwork. I wasn't even upset that I wasn't special anymore. It was important to me that I was finally free from torment and that I could help people with my talent to heal and not with my ability to see the invisible. And now I can say what and where it hurts, only sometimes using medical tricks. And I am already looking forward to my work as a doctor, which will help hundreds and hopefully thousands of people. If you like the story, please like it. And to see more of these stories, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate your uniqueness and believe that you are surrounded by good people.